Hey there, this is Laura Williams, and I want to welcome you back to the Encountering You podcast. For those of you who are new here, welcome. I love having you here. I am a licensed professional counselor, and I co-own a group practice here in Nashville, Tennessee, actually in Brentwood, which is right outside of Nashville. And together with my best friend, we manage a small group, and we focus on developmental and relational trauma. And so most of these episodes are based in a model called Healing Our Core Issues. And the basis of that model is thinking about our family of origin and how it impacted us and how it affects our ability to be an adult or to be functional as an adult when we're walking around in the present. And so as we navigate some of these episodes, what I'm really thinking about are what are the things that people come in a lot with into our office? And so when I'm doing these episodes, I'm really thinking through what would be the most helpful thing. And one of the things that's been presenting a lot lately is the topic of value or worth, right? And it's really how we esteem ourselves or how we feel about ourselves, minus all of our credentials, all of our bank accounts, all of our cars, houses, children, marriage status, all of the things that we attribute value to. It's what do we have left if all of that is gone, right? So there's a question that sits underneath a lot of this pain that people carry into my office. And underneath a lot of it, that anxiety, the relationship struggles, the patterns that they can't seem to break. And the question really is like, am I worth it? Not, am I good at my job, or am I a good enough parent, or am I a good enough spouse or friend? It's truly deeper than that. It's, am I just me, just as I am right now, without performance, without the credentials, without the approval? Am I really worth anything at all? And most people really don't say that out loud very much. A lot of people are living as if the answer could be no. So today, what we're going to talk about is the issue of value, right? And so when we're talking about the Healing Our Core Issues model, we break it down to 6 core areas. And so today, really, what we're talking about is a foundational aspect of who we are as adults, our value. Everything else, so our boundaries, owning our reality, even self-care or our attachment is truly built on this one principle, okay? And we're going to break this up into 2 parts, okay? Because this is a lot of information. So today we're going to talk about what is value, how does it actually get wounded, and what is the role that shame plays and how it shows up, okay? And then next episode, we're going to talk about how it shows up in adulthood and how it's connected to our identity, and also like what does healing look like? So let's start with what value actually means, because it's a lot of times not what you think it does, okay? So value is, another word for it would be inherent worth. It's warm regard, all right? It's not to be confused with, ego, okay? It's not earned. It's not conditional. It's not performance-based. You actually had it the moment you were born, all right? Our value doesn't change over time. It's our birthright as a human being to be considered valuable. Every child arrives with full value, whole, not partial, not potential, and certainly not contingent, meaning like nothing relies on it, okay? The goal of healthy development means helping a child know and feel that. So when we think about it, what our parents' job, if we think about this in a spiritual component, right? We know that the Lord, when we are born with all the value that we need. It's almost like a seed, okay? And then when we have our parents, what they're supposed to do is water it. And even the most well-meaning parents miss the mark sometimes. Okay, which means that a lot of times kids start basing their value based on what they're doing, how happy mommy and daddy are, Did I pick up my toys? Am I getting good grades? Am I being responsible at home? Right? And that's when we get wounded. So when our environment fails to reflect back our value to us is when that gap starts to happen. All right. The hard part is we actually can't earn worth. Okay. You can only fail to recognize it, right? Or be failed by the people who couldn't show it to you. So, what do children actually need to internalize their value? First thing we need is attunement. Okay, which, a lot of times we can just talk about this as attention from a parent, someone who is reading you accurately and responds to you. I think about this with my boys, and again, it's not perfect. Okay, so they know that they can't hide anything from me, and as soon as I can pick up a shift in their mood or their nervous system getting dysregulated, I'm checking in on them. I'm like, hey, are you okay? Right? Sometimes I'm wrong. Sometimes they're just tired. Sometimes they've had a hard day. Sometimes they just want to be alone, and that's okay too, right? It doesn't mean we have to get it right all the time. It just means we have to check in, okay? It's good enough. And if I think about it, most of us that are walking around the face of the planet didn't really get that from our parents. And again, it's not that our parents are monsters or that they are horrible people. Well-meaning people miss this part, okay? The other part is being delighted in, right? If you see a child, I know that a lot of times I'll see a kid walking around and it just makes me smile to look at this child, whether they were bopping around with curly hair or, they were playing with a toy or just even noticing their joy, right? But you're being seen as a source of joy, not a responsibility. Okay. And as a parent, we have to be responsible for our children, right? We are the responsible ones, but our child should never feel like they are a responsibility. Okay. So, this might look like your parent's face lighting up when you walk into the room. Okay. Without that, the child really has no way to see themselves as delightful. All right. Another thing we talk about is unconditional positive regard, okay? And this might be considered unconditional love, right? It's love that doesn't waver with our behavior. It's love that says, I'm for you, even when I have to correct you, or even when we have to use discipline, right? Versus love that says, I'm only here for you when you do this right. Okay. It might be like a parent that only shows up to sporting events and not to a play, right? We learn a lot about what our parents favor, what our parents like, if they're only showing up for the things that they want to be a part of, instead of investing in whatever that child is a part of. Okay. I think about all my boys differently, and each one is very different. Okay. And not all of them are interested in the same things that I'm interested in. Okay. And so when I can come alongside them and ask questions and be curious and notice things with them, it shows them that I care about what they care about. Okay. And that's kind of what we're talking about here, which transfers into being known. All right. Not just managed. Okay. There's a difference between a parent who responds to the child in front of them and one that responds to the child they want you to be. Okay. Again, do we need perfect parents? No, that would actually be harmful. But we need parents who see us, right? Who actually see us and then reflect back what they see is good. So most of you are not children anymore, right? Some of you are parents. And so you're listening to this as like, oh gosh, okay, what do I need to do for my own children? But most of us are thinking back and going, okay, what is it that's showing up in me, right? What happened that those needs didn't get met? And what does that look like? Okay. The child doesn't conclude my caregivers have a wound, right? Which is true. All of our parents are wounded. Okay. I'm wounded. You're wounded. We're all wounded. But the child, if you grew up in an environment like this, you as the child conclude something must be wrong with me, All right. This is developmental logic. The child is the center of their world. So if love is conditional or it's inconsistent, the variable is me. Okay. And then that conclusion becomes the operating system. I often tell clients that are in my office, especially if they're parents, children will take responsibility for their parents' behavior regardless. It is the parent's job to remove it from them, right? When it happens. Okay. Children are going to do that. All right. So when we think about this years later, when we're grown, this initial system, right, taking too much responsibility, it's still running. I'm still scanning my environment. Am I enough? Did I do okay? Are they happy with me? Or is somebody mad at me? Okay. And then this is where it gets complicated because that wound doesn't just sit there quietly. It actually produces two very distinct extremes, and almost everyone leans toward one of them. All right. And this is where we're going to talk about one up and one down. If you've been listening to this podcast for a while, you'll kind of get what I'm talking about here because we're talking about our value. So I'm either one up, meaning I'm better than somebody else, or I'm one down, meaning I'm less than somebody else. Both of these are extremes of the same initial wound. One up inflates, right, to avoid inadequacy. So it avoids shame. And then when I go one down, I actually collapse into the shame. All right. Neither one is actually true. One up and one down are both the wound talking, just in different directions. Okay. So let's talk about one up for a little bit. Someone might call this pride, grandiosity, superiority. I'm better than, I'm smarter than, I'm more aware than. All right. And this leads to entitlement. So rules apply to others and not really to me. I might feel the need to be right all the time. Disagreement might feel like a threat to my value. Being wrong is not an option. Okay. It can also look like contempt. This could be subtle. It could be overt dismissal of others. All right. Disgust might fall in there. You might find yourself name dropping or flashing your credentials or constant positioning. You might have difficulty receiving feedback, right? If I collapse when I go to shame, I'm not going to ever receive feedback because that is too scary to me. So when I take in criticism, right, even if it's not criticism, it lands as attack, all right? I'm also always comparing myself to everybody else. I'm always measuring myself. I'm always trying to win at something. So even when it looks like humility, I'm not like I'm not like one of those people. It's still one up. So most people that live in this area, and again, most of us will go there. Okay. So, if you're listening to this, you're like, I don't necessarily go there all the time. You probably do land there sometimes. I know I do. But at the root of it, it's terror, or you're scared of being basic or ordinary, right? Sometimes we're scared of being exposed or being found out that I'm not actually special. Okay. And the inflation is kind of like armor. All right. Then we have one down, right? And that's the other end of our value. And what that can look like is like chronic self-deprecation. So you almost like you're beating others to the punch of how I feel about myself. Okay. You're going to condemn yourself before somebody else has a chance to do it. You might apologize for taking up space. This is something that I do all the time. Okay. You apologize for having needs or having an opinion or even having a want. Okay. There's also an inability to receive compliments, and I might deflect a compliment, or I might then add a compliment about the other person. I might try to minimize it or explain it away or even redirect it. I noticed this yesterday, even for myself. I went out to lunch with my best friend, and it was my birthday actually yesterday. And we were talking about, she was just reflecting on the year, and she's like, you know what? I'm going to tell you all the things I love about you. And you want to talk about uncomfortable? Holy cow, right? And I'm sitting here and I'm thinking to myself, Laura, you've been doing this work for a really long time. Why is this so uncomfortable? Okay. And so it's really normal to have this when you're coming from a one down position. All right. This can also look like saying yes when you mean no. All right. Because your no, because of your value, right? If our value is less than, our no doesn't feel like it counts. All right. On this side, we can also compare ourselves to others. Right? But we're always striving. It feels like we're always trying to do better because we come from a place of less than. We might stay small so you don't risk being seen, and then you don't risk being found out. Or you might have a sense that you're just broken or behind or just actually fundamentally less than. Underneath, it's a deep belief that the real self, right? If I'm not performing, I'm unpolished, I'm not productive, it's actually not acceptable. And this collapse is also a form of armor. If I can make myself small, then no one can reject something I didn't offer. Okay? So when we talked about this earlier, right, most people do both. All right? Sometimes we find ourselves more common on one area or the other, okay, but we rarely are in one or the other. Most people swing between them depending on where we are. All right. We might be praised at work, so I might be in the one-up position, but I might be criticized at home, so I'm going to be in the one-down position there. I might be confident in my area of expertise, right? So I might feel one-up. So I have to catch myself here sometimes because, I deal with a lot of clients and they will come in and share with me their experience of their last therapist or about something else that they encountered. And it is very difficult sometimes to stay in that same as neutral place rather than putting myself up here, right? We can also notice this when we perceive someone as below us, right? So we might be looking down our nose at somebody. We're putting ourselves in the one-up position, right? But if it's somebody we admire or we look up to, we feel less than them. Okay. So when we're vacillating between back and forth, that swing is exhausting. And it's kind of a tell, right? Our value actually doesn't move. Our value stays put. It doesn't spike when you get a compliment, even though that feels good. And it doesn't just absolutely demolish us when we get a critique. It stays here because it isn't tied to anything, right? So as you're listening to this, what direction do you go to when your worth feels threatened? Do you puff up or do you collapse? Most people know exactly which way they lean. And most people do both, just in different arenas or different rooms. Okay. Now let's talk about what feeds that wound and keeps it alive. Because one up and one down don't just happen in a vacuum, right? They're maintained by something. And that something is shame. Shame is the engine of this wound. Okay. We want to be clear. We're not talking about guilt. Guilt is something that we actually do need. Guilt says, I did something I probably shouldn't have done. Some people might call this Holy Spirit conviction, right? It's something that tells you, I probably shouldn't have done that. Shame says, I'm the problem. I am the something that's bad. Guilt is about behavior, but it actually can motivate repair, right? So if I notice that I was short with somebody, right? I can go, oof, okay, I didn't like how I just handled that situation, okay? It doesn't mean I'm a bad person. It doesn't mean I have to go to a shame hole, right? But it does motivate me to go to the other person and say, hey, I don't like how I handled that. Would you forgive me, right? It doesn't rock our identity. It doesn't rock our value. But shame is about identity. It produces hiding and not repair. So in that similar instance, if I was short with somebody, say it was my best friend, right? And actually we had this happen not too long ago where we were getting organized for an intensive, and I was having a hard day, and I just kind of came across at her. And instead of going to a shame hole, right? Because I do that, instead of going, oh my gosh, I can't believe I did that. I'm a terrible person. I can't believe I treated her like that. I kind of pulled myself up, right? And then I went, hey, can we go back to something? I don't like how I just said that. Would you forgive me, please? And it helped us, right? It doesn't mean that if I do something wrong, that I have to go inward and hide, right? Because I'm not able to repair that. Toxic shame is not a healthy motivator. Healthy remorse? Absolutely. Okay. But toxic shame, like I'm a horrible person or I'm bad, no, it has no place. Guilt says, I made a mistake. Shame says, I am the mistake. They're not the same thing. One can actually heal a relationship, and the other one just deepens the wound. So, where does this toxic shame come from? All right. So, we can have a shaming parent, whether that's direct or indirect. Okay. So, you might have had the experience of what's wrong with you, or you should be ashamed of yourself for acting like that. You might have gotten eye rolls or sighs or withdrawal of love, right? As a punishment for something that you did. You might have been laughed at, humiliated, or even exposed in front of others, okay? You might have also experienced conditional love, right? So I'm for you when you do what I want you to do, right? The real you, not enough. The performing you, that's who I like, okay? And then comparison, right? And ranking in a family system. So something like, why can't you be more like your brother? Or why can't you be more like your sister? You might have been the scapegoat, the one who never quite got it right. You might be the disappointment in your family, okay? And then we also have religious shame. So sin framed as identity rather than an actual behavior, right? That your worth is contingent on your spiritual performance. The message that you are fundamentally broken and must be fixed before you are acceptable. And then we have cultural and a lot of systemic shame. So shame about our body, shame about our race or gender, or our economic status, even our abilities, right? The message that certain selves are less than before they've done anything at all, okay? So how does shame actually maintain itself? Well, the best place is in secrecy, right? It cannot survive when it's witnessed with compassion. This is why counseling is so important, or even opening up to a close friend, a mentor. When we keep this inside, it will continue to grow, right? And so it produces hiding. Don't let anybody see this, right? Perform, manage, control how you present. Hiding prevents the very experience that would actually heal the shame. One of the things that just happened the other day, that reference that I was talking about earlier with my friend Ashley, when I kind of blurted out this thing at her. And again, I was just having a really hard day, but I'd never done that before. And I looked at her and I said, I am so sorry. I don't know where that came from. I would never want to treat you like that. You know what she did? That was so healing. She got up, walked across the room, and gave me a hug because she knew how bad I felt. Okay. When I think about what that experience did, it took shame and it brought it out. And that healing of somebody else going, hey, I see you and you're not bad, right? Was a beautiful healing of that moment. Okay. You can never find out that you are acceptable if you never let yourself be seen. That's the loop. Okay. Shame produces hiding. Hiding prevents the healing, and then the wound just stays there and grows and grows. Okay. Brene Brown, who's one of the premier shame experts, says shame needs 3 things to survive: secrecy, silence, and judgment. It's perfect. But what do we do? The antidote to this is empathy, being seen and not destroyed, right? So we can either allow someone else to do that, or we can do that for ourselves. Shame is not the truth about you. It's a conclusion that a child drew in an environment that couldn't give them what they needed. And it's probably been running your life as if it were true, and it isn't. So shame is not just a thought, right? It lives in the body. If you've been listening to this podcast for a while, you know that when we talk about this, we're talking a lot about our somatic experience of whatever we're feeling, okay? We might feel heat in our face. That is one that shows up for me a lot. The urge to disappear, wanting to sink through the floor, okay? Sometimes I can feel it in my chest, like my chest is caving in, or my eyes divert from eye contact. My voice even might get small. These are all physiological responses, right? The body truly enacting the belief that I should not be seen. Healing shame requires working with the body, not just our mind, right? Insight alone won't reach it. The body has to be part of this process. So, in thinking about this, where do you go when you're feeling criticized or exposed? Do you go one up or do you go one down? What does that tell you about what you learned about your worth? Is there a belief about yourself that you've never said out loud? Something you suspect might be true about you that you hope no one ever finds out? That's worth sitting with, okay? And that's often where the shame lives. Can you think of a time someone saw something real in you and didn't turn away? What did that feel like? And why is it hard to let that be true? So when we think about value, value is the foundation, right? It's the ground floor. Everything else is built on it. When it's wounded, the effects ripple out everywhere in our life. Remember, one up and one down are the same wound, right? Pride and shame, same thing. It's just looking different, okay? And shame is what keeps the wound running, keeps it in secret, it's in silence, and it's in our body, okay? In our next episode, we're going to talk about how all of this shows up in adulthood. It might show up in your work, your relationships, even how you feel about yourself or your identity. And we're going to talk about what healing actually looks like when that wound is this foundational, okay? So in closing today, you were worth it before you did anything to earn it. You were worth it before anyone told you so. And you're worth it now, even if that feels impossible to believe. So next time, we're going to look at what happens when that belief has been running your life without your knowledge. I look forward to being with you next time on the Encountering You podcast.
Access more